Hi, this is the second episode of Our World's Nuts, Elohim Reigns, Owner Podcast. These are crazy times. To prove my point, just turn on the news, open a newspaper, open a textbook. We might be on the brink of World War III, either in the Ukraine or in the Middle East right now. And a presidential candidate might actually go to jail in mid-September. But the craziness is nothing new. Paul writes in Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depend on human tradition and the basic principles of this world, rather than on Christ. Let's break this verse down. See to it. Top priority. Make sure it's done. I believe this phrase is only found one time in Scripture, and it's close to another phrase, above all else. This phrase is found in Proverbs 4:23, where it says, above all else, guard your heart. Okay, so Paul says in the Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive. Interesting word, because when Paul wrote this word, he was already captive. This is one of the prison epistles. So captivity, Paul was a slave. Paul was a slave in more than one way. He called himself a slave to Jesus in Romans, but then he's also a slave to the Roman government. He's taken captive. Galatians 5:1 says, for it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourself be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Slavery, yoke, burden. We'll talk more about that. But let's go back to guard your heart for a second. Guard. It says in 1 Corinthians 16:31, be on guard. And then 2 Timothy 1:14 says, guard the good deposit. And then 2 Timothy 1:12 says, guard what's been entrusted to you. See to it, guard it. Make sure you're not taken captive. And then he says, by philosophy. Now, philosophy is an interesting word. Philo means love, and osophy or Sophia means wisdom. So philosophy is a love of wisdom. He said, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophies. Well, I believe that the philosophies we're under can be yokes. Remember, it says, Paul writes in Galatians 5:1, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. The yoke doesn't have to be a physical yoke. It can be philosophical. There's 4 points about these yoke philosophies. One, it says in Colossians 2:8, they're hollow and deceptive. Hollow, empty, deceptive. Wow, lies. So these hollow, empty lies, they're empty without substance, can take us captive. Paul writes in Ephesians 6:5, 6 and 7, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things God's wrath will come on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. Wow. Let no one deceive you with empty words. Our world is being deceived by empty words like crazy. There's philosophies that have taken this world just by storm. And we see these philosophies all the times. There's no right or wrongs. Guys can become girls. You can be gender fluid. It's just ridiculous. And these philosophies are taking a stranglehold in our society. Okay, the second part of these philosophies is let no one hollow and deceptive philosophies. Deceptive, which means it's based on lies. It means it pretends to be something it's not. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 11:14 and 15, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then that his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. Isaiah says it best about lies. Isaiah 44:20, he feeds on ashes. A deluded heart misleads him. He cannot save himself or say, is not this thing in my right hand a lie? Why can't he say it's a lie? It's because every lie we believe it to be true. Example, if I ask you, what was the capital of Kentucky? And I said, is it Louisville or Louisville? Now, if you don't know the capital, it's easy for me to deceive you. The capital of Kentucky is not Louisville, it's not Lexington, it's Frankfurt. But if you don't know that, you're easy to be deceived. Okay, so the third type of these philosophies that we become yoked to is human tradition. Man, the human philosophy can take control of us. And it's just, I love what Jesus said in Mark 7:8. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. Wow. And then the fourth point of these yoke philosophies, basic principles of this world. Galatians 4:3 says this, so also when we were children, we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world. There are a growing number of people in this world who frankly seem to have lost their mind. We've experienced exactly what Scripture says in Romans 1:22, professing to be wise, they became fools. Acts 26:24, at this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense and said this, you are out of your mind, Paul. He shouted, your great learning has driven you nuts. Wow, there are people who have great learning that their learning has driven them nuts. If I go to college campus right now, if I go to Ball State, where my office is located, right near campus, and I simply ask students how many genders there are, I'm sure I'm going to get a whole variety of responses that are insane. I think people have been made mad by education. So he says, don't be taken captive by hollow deceptive philosophies rather than on Christ. I asked AI Copilot the other day, can men have menstrual periods? Now, I know they can't, but AI said this, certainly, exclamation point. So yes, men can have periods. It's a biological reality. This is what AI said. It's a biological reality separate from gender identity. Oh my heavens. AI, artificial intelligence, is going to tell people that men can have periods and it's a biological reality. Well, you and I as Christians believe it's a biological fallacy. Guys cannot get pregnant. That is actually a true statement. Now, here's what's sad. If I make that statement to the world, people get mad. Galatians 4:16 says it best, have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Wow, truth can make people enemy. I saw some interesting, a cancer charity apologizing for using the word cervix because it wasn't inclusive enough. Here's the phrase they want you to use instead. They want you to use the phrase front hole. That is so vile. How about we just use the word cervix? Isaiah 5:20 says this, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Jesus, when he was talking to Pilate, Pilate asked him, what is truth? That's our world today. It wrestles with what truth is. And the Owner podcast is going to reveal truth, and it's going to show some of the crazy philosophies of this world and how Satan is using them to deceive people. Satan will use these deceptive philosophies to divide America and the world. Jesus said this. Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself will not stand, and every city or household divided against itself will be ruined. So what philosophies are you basing your life on? Are you being held captive? If you're being held captive, would you realize it? Jeremiah 13:23 says we can get accustomed to things. Some things we can get accustomed to, we shouldn't. Our society has some grand narratives that really, I think, like from the first episode, they're just chock full of nuts. Isaiah 9:2-4 says it best. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. I don't think the darkness he's talking about here is physical. I think it's philosophical. We can walk in philosophical darkness. And then he goes on in verse 4. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdened them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Wow, these philosophies become oppressive, they become burdens, and people need to be set free. It's God's presence and his power and his principles that set us free. Jeremiah 27:2 gives a visual on this. This is what the Lord said to me: make a yoke out of straps and crossbars and put it on your neck. There are people who have philosophies that are just holding them captive, and they don't know it. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28-30, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And then he says this, for my yoke is easy and my burdens are light. It's interesting, in 29, he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I think this backs up the point that these yokes are really philosophies. We've got to learn from the right teacher. Jesus said in Matthew 23:10, nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. This reminds me of the Bereans. Paul writes in Acts 17:11 that they were more noble than the Thessalonians because they tested to see what Paul was saying was true with Scripture. Now, a biblical truth, with everything going on in this world, we need to know one very simple thing. Psalm 97:1, the Lord reigns, let the earth rejoice, let the distant shores rejoice. A.W. Tozer said this, while it looks like things are out of control, behind the scenes, there's a God who hasn't surrendered his authority. We've got to recognize with all the craziness in this world, God still reigns. Colossians says it in 1:17, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Christians with this crazy world, God's still in control. He's got this. Psalm 19:97 says this, I love your laws, I meditate on them all day long. We need to look at God and teach and say, teach us the philosophies we should have, the beliefs we should have to navigate this crazy world. As I said at the beginning of today's episode, it's pretty nuts out there. I can find nutty philosophies anywhere I go. I can find nutty people anywhere I go. It's just that we have to figure out how to navigate these situations and represent Jesus Christ. Paul says we're Christ's ambassadors. Don't forget, in this crazy world, we represent Jesus Christ. I'll see you next week.